The topic of science and faith is often introduced like some kind of epic battle, a fight to the death between arch nemeses, like Batman and Joker, like Superman and Lex Luthor. If one wins, then the other one must lose. And many people think that science and the Christian faith are like that. And so because they value science, which is great, they feel they have to reject the Christian faith. Well, my name is Stuart, and my first degree and master's was in the sciences, particularly chemistry, at Cambridge University. But now I'm studying theology, which is the study of God, and I'm training to be a vicar in the Church of England. And I want to suggest that far from being arch nemeses at war, science and faith are both really important. And if we force ourselves to choose just one or the other, we're going to lose out massively either way. One thing that's interesting to note is that many of the most significant early scientists who influenced the way we think about science had a strong belief in God. People like Galileo and Kepler, like Pasteur and Calvin and Newton all believed in God and had a strong Christian faith. Actually, there's now quite a lot of evidence to suggest that belief in the Christian God was foundational in the formation of the assumptions and methods of early science. So writing about the rise of science in the 16th and 17th century, C.S. Lewis says, "Men became scientific because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver." And that was certainly true for early scientists like Descartes and Newton, who saw the rationality and reliability of the God they believed in as the reason why they could investigate his world with scientific method. So the early European science was full of Christians and influenced by Christian thought. But there are many professional scientists today who are Christians as well. Many of my own friends around the world work in a variety of fields of science and have a strong belief in God. But there are more famous examples. Francis Collins, who was head of the Human Genome Project, John Lennox, who is a professor of maths at Oxford, and Alistair McGrath, who was a biophysicist and is now a theologian. They're all Christians, and they've written some great stuff about the relationship between science and the Christian faith. Now, all of those examples don't prove anything, just as there being atheists in science doesn't prove there isn't a God. But maybe they suggest that there isn't such a fundamental divide between the Christian faith and science. Maybe we don't have to choose between just one or the other. One thing that I think is really important to realize is that science just can't answer all of our questions. Different kinds of questions require different kinds of data and different kinds of methods to answer them. This is true even within the sciences. So for example, there's actually quite a big difference between the experimental sciences, like physics and chemistry, which investigate things in the present using repeatable experiments, and the historical sciences like cosmology and paleontology, which investigate the past and try and reconstruct it using theories and models. And then there are the disciplines outside of science, things like law and economics and philosophy. These are perfectly rational and logical disciplines, but because they're asking different questions to the sciences, they have different data and methods. But that doesn't make them invalid. So the sciences are actually really good at answering some questions, the ones they're equipped to answer, about the relationship between the events and phenomena in the physical world. But there are some questions that the sciences just can't answer. For example, the sciences can't answer questions about beauty. They can talk about light and neural processing and pigments, but they can't actually say that a picture or a landscape is beautiful. And the sciences can't answer questions about purpose or intent, because those aren't physical things. And science can't answer questions about morality and ethics, because you can't get from a purely physical description of how things are to how they ought to be, what's right and wrong. But there are still loads of great reasons to study science. The natural world is fascinating and beautiful, and for Christians who believe God is behind it all, studying the natural world through science only brings more reasons to thank and praise God. And secondly, and importantly, science is a really useful tool for improving people's lives, whether by inventing new renewable energy sources, new ways of growing crops, or new medicines. But the point is that just because science is great at answering some questions doesn't mean that we don't need other ways of inquiring about the world and ourselves. And I would suggest that theology, the study of God and the Christian faith, is one of those other ways, a way that's compatible with science and answers some of the biggest questions of all in life. Now, I understand that some people might have specific objections to my saying that theology and science are compatible. Some might say, what about the book of Genesis? Doesn't that make scientific claims that are incompatible with the theories of evolution or the Big Bang? And that's a great question. Now, personally, I don't think that the book of Genesis and the theories of evolution and the Big Bang are incompatible. And so if that's a topic you're interested in, check out the mini videos addressing that topic specifically. Another great question is, if Christians are fine with science, then how can they also believe in miracles? And so there's another mini video addressing that topic as well. Overall, I'd like to suggest that the relationship between theology and science is a bit like the difference between the way you would go about studying a watchmaker as compared to a watch. One is the study of the Creator, the other of its creation. And so, although both are perfectly logical and rational, they take very different forms. For example, if you found a watch, you could study it by taking it apart and doing all kinds of experiments on it, and you could learn all about how the different parts fitted together and worked together. But if you found a watchmaker, you wouldn't study him like that. Instead, you would talk to him. You would ask him all kinds of questions, and most importantly, you'd listen to what he had to say about himself and about the watch. And actually, taking that a step further, if you didn't have anything else to study but the watch, no manual and no other watches to compare it to, what could you really tell about the watchmaker from the study of the watch? Not much. You wouldn't know whether it's his favorite watch, or maybe one he made to show what he didn't like. And you wouldn't know whether it was working or broken, because you wouldn't know the purpose that he'd made it from. In fact, I reckon if you only had the watch to study, absolutely nothing else, you couldn't even tell whether there was a watchmaker. But actually, that isn't quite true the other way around. If you were able to talk to the watchmaker, well, he could tell you about himself, but he could also tell you all about the watch. He could tell you about those things that you could learn by studying the watch. For example, how it works, because he made it. But he could also tell you about all those things you couldn't learn from studying the watch. About whether he liked it, about what its purpose was, and whether it was a good watch, working as it should. So you see, the study of the watchmaker includes the study of the watch, because he knows all about how the physical watch works. But the study of the watch alone, the science of the watch, doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the watchmaker. And the same is true about the relationship between theology, the study of God, and science. Because theology, the study of the Creator, has a place in it for the study of the creation. But the same is not true the other way around. Study of science alone doesn't necessarily tell us anything about God. Because God is not testable or controllable, not reducible or quantifiable, because he's not a law of nature, but the Lord over nature, science just isn't equipped to prove or disprove the existence of God. But that doesn't mean that God is inaccessible to us, hidden away in some place we can't interact with him. There is one place you can go in the world to see and interact with God, and that is the person Jesus Christ. The central claim of the Christian faith is that the man Jesus, who walked on earth AD 0 to AD 33, was God, the watchmaker, and shows us what God is like. And the central invitation of the Christian faith is to come, see and observe. Come and hear the biblical stories of Jesus' life, teaching, death and resurrection. And then ask, reason and decide, is this God?